Could moving Brandon Carlo actually be part of this Boston Bruins retool?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, March 4th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are 3 days removed from the NHL trade deadline, and some Bruins reports, rumors heating up a little bit, with reports suggesting the Calgary Flames are heavily pursuing Brandon Carlo. We'll touch on that here in a moment, and also discuss two guys that I am almost sure will be moved before the deadline, as well as preview tonight's game against the Nashville Predators and update you on where the Bruins stand in the playoff race. Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. So we've heard the rumors about a couple of guys that will likely be moved. Your Trent Fredericks, your Justin Brazeaus. We'll touch on them later on in the episode. But there's a couple of guys who could be moved as part of a retool that would really signal a transition for the Boston Bruins, namely Charlie Coyle, who would garner some attention as a third line center for a Stanley Cup contending team, as well as defenseman Brandon Carlo. And yesterday, Anthony DeMarco of Daily Faceoff. And again, take some of these reports, rumors with grains of salt. I always like to wait until you hear from some of the big time insiders, or of course, when it's verified, or the player himself. Anyways, Anthony DeMarco, Daily Faceoff, posted yesterday on X. I was going to say tweeted, but you know what I mean. Sounds like the Flames have reached out on NHL Bruins defenseman Brandon Carlo. Teams have yet to dive into details, but Calgary is interested. He added not too many players on Boston's roster not available for the right price, which is also a fairly interesting note. Now, yesterday I had handpicked a handful of players that I thought were largely untouchable, with me adding Matt Poitras to that list. I had Jeremy Swayman, David Pastrnak, Charlie McAvoy, Mason Lohrei, Matt Poitras, probably Brad Marchand as well, but still an outside chance that he could be moved. Not on that list was Brandon Carlo. And while he is a very valuable defenseman for this team and still fairly young, Carlo would be an asset for any team looking to make a run here in the playoffs. The Flames are holding on to the final wildcard spot in the Western Conference. They'd like to bolster their blue line. They tried Tyson Barrie there. He was buried in the minors after being waived. They have, of course, Mackenzie Weegar and Rasmus Andersson, but after that, it's pretty thin on the blue line for the Calgary Flames. And when you have Dustin Wolf playing at a high level for them as a potential Rookie of the Year candidate, and, you know, some guys who came to Calgary with a view to being a competitive team, like a Nazem Kadri, who signed that $7 million per season contract. You want to try to go for it when you have a chance, or at least shore up for the playoffs. And the thing with Carlo, he is a dependable stay-at-home defenseman. We saw this against Pittsburgh a lot over the weekend. So important on the penalty kill. uses his long stick to break up passes and eliminate scoring chances. But his contract is still pretty nice. He's only 28 years old, signed for another 2 seasons at a very reasonable cap hit of $4.1 million. And with the salary cap going up, you can see why that would be attractive for teams looking to shore up the blue line. The Flames would get him for this upcoming playoff run plus 2 more seasons at $4.1 million. Now, I'm more open to trading Charlie Coyle because he's only got 1 year remaining on his contract following this one. To give up Carlo in his kind of later prime years, that would really signal a shift for the Bruins where they would be getting younger and subtracting a guy who's pretty valuable on the back end. Now, this season hasn't been great for Brandon Carlo. He has had to step up big time in the absences of Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy, taking some huge defensive assignments where there's been a lot of flux in terms of the pad's been very weak for this team. There's some injury concerns as well with him, dating back to previous seasons where he was not able to suit up in the playoffs. But he's a very steady defenseman, not very flashy, a dependable presence, who could really stabilize a decor by not logging the heaviest minutes, but, second pairing minutes. Now, the Flames do have 2 first-round picks this summer. They don't have their own. That was dealt to the Montreal Canadiens in dumping the Sean Monahan contract. But they do have picks that came from elsewhere, and that would obviously be an attractive piece for the Boston Bruins because, they have their own draft pick, first round pick, but of course they would love to add more picks if they are indeed retooling. They have a first from New Jersey in the Jacob Markstrom trade, as well as a first from the Florida Panthers in the Matthew Tkachuk trade. So they do have some pieces that they can deal, and they do have the cap space. They have 17 million, almost 18 million in available cap space at the moment. So if any team could pull off, it would be the Calgary Flames. And if they are indeed willing to float a first round pick in exchange for Brandon Carlo, then that's really something that Don Sweeney would have to look at. There is some value there because of the fact he has 2 more seasons on his contract. With the cap going up, it will take a smaller percentage against the cap, which will make that contract even more valuable. So maybe you hold on to him and see if he can be part of turning things around next season. If not, maybe he has even more value next year playing a bit better and with that lower percentage of the cap. But if a team is willing to pay a first and even plus for Brandon Carlo, you have to entertain that kind of offer and thank Carlo for his service. But, at this point, game is going to get any more solid or his value will get any higher. So you might as well, if some team is going to come in offering some solid assets for him, then that's certainly something that you need to take a look at. Now, what's more certain, I think, is a couple of forwards being dealt before Friday's deadline, and we'll touch on that here as the podcast continues. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk or on a road trip, just need a quick protein boost. They're always my go to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in shell options are a classic favorite. Snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. The NHL trade deadline is about 3.5 days away, or 3.25 days away. And the Boston Bruins should be fairly active here in the coming days. Brandon Carlo, as we talked about, is drawing interest. I would not be surprised if the Bruins are getting calls on, well, Brad Marchand, of course, despite his injury over the weekend, that, according to Elliot Friedman, will keep him out of action until at least Saturday. There's Charlie Coyle perhaps drawing interest. And of course, two forwards who I believe will indeed be traded, and that would be Trent Frederick and Justin Brazeau. Now, the Athletics, Chris Johnston and Pierre LeBrun posted an article yesterday, what we're hearing about every NHL team heading into deadline week. And they write, of the Boston Bruins, these are unusual times on Causeway where a perennial buyer has had to slowly get its mind around the prospect of selling. The task was made a little more difficult last week when Trent Frederick suffered a lower body injury that left him in a walking boot. Still, there's a belief the injured forward will be dealt in the days ahead, along with perhaps fellow rental Justin Brazeau. Meanwhile, it's down to white knuckle time on negotiations with to get something done, with the term being the main sticking point in talks to date. One thing that does not appear likely is Boston shipping the heart and soul legacy player out of town. So that means to me that Trent Frederick, despite his injury, will be traded. There's certainly still a market for his services, pending unrestricted free agent with a very nice contract for a team that may not have a ton of space, but looking to add some grit, some scoring when he's rolling to the lineup. Now, the writing I've felt was on the wall for Frederick once the Mark Kastelik contract extension was signed. They're very similar players, and Kastelik has fit in so well with the Bruins this season and really fills that similar role to Frederick and has even been more productive than Frederick so far this season. So I really do think that is going to happen. And same with Brazeau. He has really emerged as a legit scorer at the NHL level for the Boston Bruins. They took a chance on him. He's got a $775,000 per season contract. He's a UFA at season's end. He's been in and out of the lineup lately as a healthy scratch. Not the speediest guy on the team. And for instance, when the Bruins took on the Maple Leafs not too long ago, he was scratched because they didn't feel like he could keep up in those situations. But he's a good net front presence, a guy with a pretty deceptive and searing shot. And he would be certainly a guy that teams would target for fairly affordable goal scoring depth to take into the playoffs. Cole Koepke might be in the same position. He was brought in and has, well, he started off pretty well for the Bruins, kind of tailed off a bit, but same contract as Brazeau. He's an unrestricted free agent. Anybody who's UFA for the Bruins, I think, could be put in play, including Parker Witherspoon, who's a UFA at season's end. Perhaps even some guys that are UFAs down in Providence, like a Patrick Brown, Riley Tufte, Vinny Lettieri, Mark McLaughlin, perhaps. They could all be floated in a package for something better along with any of the other guys. Now, when it comes to Marchand, I still do think that while it does make a lot of sense, as I argued last season, to trade him because the return would be pretty hefty. And seems as though, according to these two guys, the Bruins and Marchand aren't far away in terms of valuation. It's more the term. He's going to be 37. He's probably looking for 2-3 seasons, whereas we've seen in the past, the Bruins, even with Patrice Bergeron, they kind of took it year by year in the later stages of his tenure. So maybe they want to go 1 year and then, just keep re-upping as long as he wants to play. Marchand wants seemingly that more security here on his next deal, at least a couple seasons. So that might be the only sticking point, but there's certainly an appetite to keep him in town and for him to end his career in black and gold. Now, there's always the possibility that they trade him, get a bunch of assets, and then he re-signs in the summer, which is still a possibility if he hits unrestricted free agency. That could be a win-win for everybody, but you never know what could come up if indeed he is traded. Maybe he likes it wherever he's traded and wins a cup and wants to defend it. Who knows? You never know what will happen if you trade a guy away and what feelings will come up, what resentments or bad feelings that kind of end the relationship. But to me, Frederick, Brazeau certainly will be traded. Perhaps Carlo, Coyle as well. But I believe the Bruins should indeed be sellers here because of the fact it's a buyer's. There's so many more buyers than sellers right now. You look at the Eastern Conference, and yes, the Bruins are still technically alive in the playoff race. It's only a couple points out of a wild card spot. They're 2 points back of the Detroit Red Wings for that second wild card spot. But you look at point percentage in the Eastern Conference, and the Bruins are 12th in terms of point percentage. The Canadiens have passed them after winning 5 in a row. The New York Rangers have passed them. They've won a couple in a row now, 7-3 in their last 10. The Senators, Red Wings, Blue Jackets, all fighting for that spot right now, a wild card spot. And the Bruins, the Islanders, Penguins, and Sabres have worse point percentages than the Boston Bruins, who are doing themselves no favors by going 3-5-2 over their past 10. They could pick up a couple big points tonight against the Nashville Predators, a very beatable team, and we'll preview that game here as the podcast continues. Now, if you think this Bruins season has been disappointing, take a look at the Nashville Predators. They were a surprise team last season, and they made some big moves over the summer, signing Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, who recently won a Conn Smythe Trophy. They were looking to build on last season's success and perhaps even challenge for the Stanley Cup. At least still a playoff team, but they have taken a huge nosedive, 21, 32, and 7 through 60 games, a 408 point percentage, and a minus 48 goal differential, which is quite remarkable considering they have one of the best defensemen in the game in Roman Josi, a very solid goaltender in UC Saros. Josi currently injured, so the Bruins won't have to worry about him. Stamkos has not paid off at all, and they're even more disappointing than the Bruins this season. And they have probably higher expectations. The Nashville Predators come into this one having lost 2 in a row. They're 3-7 over their past 10 games, and this is a winnable game for the Bruins, straight up. Now, the Predators' special teams are better than Boston's. They rank 21st on the power play, 11th on the penalty kill. The Bruins still 29th on the power play. Their penalty kill has improved. They're now up to 23rd. And like I said yesterday, since February 1st, they're like 6th on the penalty kill, which is great. Now, the Predators have the 31st ranked offense in the NHL, averaging only 2.53 goals per game. The Bruins aren't much better, 28th at 2.69. The Predators are allowed 3.35 goals per game, which is ranked 28th in the NHL. The Bruins allowing 3.13, which is 22nd. So when it comes to offense, defense, the Predators are one of the few teams that have worse numbers than the Boston Bruins. They're led in scoring by Philip Forsberg, who's still having a decent season, 54 points in 60 games. But then you have Marchand at 45 points, Ryan O'Reilly at 36 points, Steven Stamkos with only 33 points in 60 games, which is a huge disappointment for this team. I mentioned Roman Josi. He's got 38 points on the blue line, but he is currently week to week. You look at the goaltending, Jeremy Swayman. Yeah, he's had a disappointing year. He's at 898 with a 2.95 goals against average. Still around 500, 18, 20, and 6. Saros has almost identical numbers, 898 save percentage, 2.96 goals against average, but a 13, 25, and 6 record, just not getting the support that he needs up front. Over the past 5 games, Colton Sissons leads the team in scoring with 4 points. Cole Smith with 2 goals. Those are not names we're very familiar with, and it shows you how poor this team has been playing this season. David Pastrnak leads the way for the Bruins with 7 points over the last 5 games. His point streak was ended, and he's still, one of the hottest players in the NHL. It's the second and final meeting between these two teams. They played earlier this season, a 4-0 Angelista scoring. Nyquist has since been traded to the Minnesota Wild as the Predators begin their own little attempted retool or trying to salvage some pieces from this season. This was a team with high expectations, and they've really disappointed. The Bruins still technically alive in the playoff race, but a lot of teams that they have to jump in order to make it. And again, with so many teams still alive in the playoff race, it gives those teams hope that they could make it if they add this piece or that piece. And that means the Bruins should most certainly be selling, because maybe teams will be willing to give up more than market price for some of these assets in order to get a leg up on the playoffs and try to take a bit of a run here. So that's the absolute latest on the Boston Bruins here as of Tuesday morning. They play the Predators tonight. I'm not expecting Brad Marchand to be in the lineup. If he does pop up, I'll be sure to update that on the YouTube channel. So please keep it locked to Locked On Bruins on YouTube, on Instagram, for the absolute latest. I'll be posting reels and shorts there. Thumbs up this video, subscribe on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app so that you never miss a thing. Also, check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where you can get league-wide stories that matter from our local experts. You can find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's it for today's episode, my friends. I hope you are all taking care of yourselves, taking care of each other. It's a crazy world there is stuff plus set in, like, I think it's 1800s London, boxing, crime gangs. It's a really fantastic show with some great performances. So check that out if you're looking for something to watch these days. All right, that's it. Happy Tuesday. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.